I was standing at the break room counter watching my instant ramen spin in the microwave like a tiny tornado of regret, when I heard it. That particular brand of laughter that makes your teeth clench. The kind that screams inherited wealth and never faced consequences. I turned just enough to peer through the glass partition separating the break room from the executive corridor, and there they were. Samuel Knight, CEO of Luxel Dynamics, stood with his arm around his son's shoulders like they'd just won the Super Bowl. And his son, Dylan Knight, was sitting in my chair. Not just any chair. My chair. The one I'd spent 9 years breaking in, positioning just right so the morning light wouldn't glare on my monitors but would still warm the left side of my face during those brutal January mornings. Dylan had his feet propped up on my desk, expensive sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and he was spinning slowly, taking in the view of the city skyline like he was auditioning for a cologne commercial. "This space has better feng shui," Dylan announced, gesturing broadly at the walls I'd decorated with compliance certifications and industry awards. "I'll take it." Samuel clapped him on the back, beaming. "Done. Grace won't mind. She's a team player." I didn't storm in. Didn't march down the hall with righteous fury blazing. I just stood there, one hand on the microwave door, the other clutching a paper napkin, and watched Dylan flip through my quarterly infrastructure report like it was a takeout menu he was about to throw away. Samuel caught my eye through the glass. For a second our gazes locked. He didn't wave. Didn't nod. Didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He just turned back to Dylan and started talking about their ski trip to Whistler. I pulled my ramen out, dumped it straight into the trash and walked back to my desk. Well, what used to be my desk. If you're already grinding your teeth, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash the like, because apparently 94% of you watch these stories and forget to support the channel. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The next morning there was a sticky note on my monitor. Lime green, the kind that practically glows under fluorescent lights. Scrawled in someone's hurried handwriting. Effective immediately, you've been moved to a hybrid schedule. See HR for details. No signature. No email trail. Just a post-it note like I was being evicted from my own professional life with office supplies. I sat down in the cramped cubicle they'd assigned me, 3 rows deep in the operations bullpen, and watched through the glass walls as Dylan strutted into my old office carrying a matcha latte and wearing a hoodie that probably cost $400. He saw me looking, gave me a thumbs up and a wink, then shut the door. My door. With my nameplate still on it. I packed one box. Just one. Took down the framed photo of my late mother, unplugged my ergonomic keyboard, left all the procurement binders and vendor directories on the shelf. Dylan wouldn't know what to do with them anyway. Probably think they were decorative. But here's what nobody at Luxel Dynamics understood, not Dylan, not Samuel, not the entire legal department that rubber-stamped everything without reading it. That office wasn't just a room with a view. That office was the physical access point for our entire vendor compliance infrastructure. Every NDA-protected relationship we'd built over the past 8 years. Every audit trail we were required to maintain for SEC compliance. Every real-time governance protocol that kept us from drowning in regulatory fines. And here's the kicker. None of it belonged to Luxel Dynamics. 5 years ago, when our vendor management system was collapsing under the weight of an aggressive acquisition strategy, I'd proposed a solution. We'd route everything through my limited liability company, Sentinel Oversight Solutions. Cleaner audit trails, better vendor relationships, fewer internal bureaucratic bottlenecks. The board approved it in one meeting. Samuel signed off without even reading past the executive summary. They were happy to let the infrastructure lady handle the messy details while they focused on quarterly earnings calls and golf tournaments. So when I left that office, I didn't just leave behind a desk and a window. I left behind the encrypted access terminal for a fully integrated compliance framework owned and operated by Sentinel Oversight Solutions. A framework registered under my name, encrypted with my personal security keys, and very specifically not part of Luxel Dynamics' direct IT infrastructure. Dylan wanted the view. He had no idea what came with it. I worked from home for the next 4 days. Not because I was upset, though I absolutely was. But because I needed time to reroute everything through my backup systems, to document every failed access attempt, and to watch very carefully as Luxel Dynamics started to realize what they'd done. The first sign came on day 2. A Slack message from Jeremy in operations, One of the few people in that building who'd ever treated me like a human being instead of a vending machine for compliance reports. Hey Grace, quick question. Do you know why the vendor portal isn't loading? Dylan's trying to access the Q3 audit logs. I stared at the message for a full minute, then typed back, not sure. Have you tried restarting? I hadn't. I knew exactly why it wasn't loading. The portal was tied to the physical terminal in my old office, authenticated through a hardware security key that was now sitting in my home office, 30 miles away. 2 hours later, Jeremy sent another message. Dylan's asking if you can send over the compliance certificates. We need them for the board meeting Thursday. I didn't respond. There were no certificates to send. The export function required authentication from the primary terminal, which required my biometric login, which required me to actually be present at the machine. A machine they'd locked me out of when they gave Dylan the keys to my office. At 6:47 p.m. Samuel emailed me directly. Subject, quick favor. Hi Grace. Dylan mentioned some technical difficulties with your old workstation. Can you provide remote access credentials so we can get everything back online? Thanks for your help. I read it 3 times. Felt my jaw clench tighter with each pass. Then I typed exactly 2 sentences. That workstation is not Luxel property. It's a Sentinel Oversight Solutions asset as outlined in our vendor agreement. No pleasantries. No corporate softening. Just the truth. Then I logged off, poured myself a glass of wine, and watched the sun set over my backyard while somewhere across town, Dylan Knight probably sat in my office wondering why none of his screens were showing anything useful. By day 3 the cracks were showing. Not hairline fractures, full structural failures. The automated SOC2 export that was supposed to fire every Tuesday at 6 a.m. didn't happen. That export was critical, a pre-scheduled compliance report that got sent directly to our external auditors. It ran through the Sentinel terminal using a time-locked authentication sequence that couldn't be replicated or overridden. Without it, our auditors would flag us for non-compliance. With enough flags, we'd lose our security certifications. Without those certifications, half our enterprise clients would terminate their contracts. Dylan sent a message to the entire operations team at 9:15 a.m. Hey team, looks like we're having some legacy system issues. IT's working on it. Hang tight. Legacy system issues. I almost laughed. There was nothing legacy about Sentinel Oversight. It was cutting-edge, custom-built, and completely inaccessible without my authorization. At 11:30, someone from IT opened the Sentinel vendor agreement in our shared document repository. I still had notifications turned on. I watched the document get opened, scrolled through, then closed. Opened again 10 minutes later. This time they lingered on page 17. That was the page with section 8.4, Physical Infrastructure Requirements. The primary access terminal shall remain in its designated location. Any relocation, modification, or transfer of the terminal requires written authorization from both parties with a minimum 10 business days notice. They'd moved Dylan into that office 6 days ago. They hadn't notified me. Hadn't requested authorization. Hadn't even acknowledged that the terminal existed as anything other than Grace's computer. By 3 p.m., the vendor attestation reports were failing. We had 12 high-risk vendors, all of whom required monthly compliance verifications. Normally, those verifications pulled automatically from each vendor's secure portal through Sentinel's integration layer. Now they were getting error messages. The IT director, a man named Colin who'd always been decent to me, sent me a direct message at 4:52 p.m. Grace, I don't know what's happening, but every system that touches vendor management is throwing authentication errors. Is there something I should know? I responded immediately, check the Sentinel vendor agreement, section 8.4. Then call me. He called 17 minutes later. Grace, he said, and I could hear him pacing. Tell me I'm reading this wrong. You're not. The terminal in your old office, the one Dylan's using as a glorified monitor stand, that's the primary access node for our entire compliance infrastructure? Yes. And according to this contract, moving it without your written consent constitutes a material breach? Correct. There was a long silence. Then, how much trouble are we in? I didn't sugarcoat it. The breach triggered 6 days ago. According to section 12.2, you have 10 business days to remedy before penalty enforcement begins. You're now on day 4. What happens if we don't remedy? Then every day past the deadline accrues a penalty of $48,000. Plus, all access rights remain suspended until the breach is resolved. Another silence, longer this time. Samuel needs to know about this. I imagine he does, I said and hung up. The emergency board meeting happened the next morning. I wasn't invited, but Jeremy gave me the play-by-play over encrypted messages. Apparently, Samuel opened the meeting with his usual confident posture, ready to discuss Q4 projections. The general counsel, a woman named Helen who'd been with the company since before I arrived, interrupted him before he could finish his opening remarks. We have a significant legal issue that requires immediate attention, she'd said, sliding a printed copy of the Sentinel Agreement across the table. Samuel picked it up, squinted at it, then set it back down. What am I looking at? Section 8.4. We breached a vendor contract when we relocated Grace Dawson's office. Grace's office? Samuel frowned. We didn't relocate her office. We reassigned her to hybrid and gave Dylan her old space. That's an internal HR matter. Helen shook her head. That space wasn't just Grace's office. It housed the primary access terminal for Sentinel Oversight Solutions, the vendor compliance framework we've been using for 5 years. Moving that terminal without Grace's written consent is a material breach. So we'll get her consent, Samuel said, waving his hand dismissively. Grace is reasonable. She'll understand. She already declined. Helen pulled out a printout of my email response. And the 10-day remedy window is halfway expired. That's when the CFO, a man named Robert, spoke up. What's the penalty if we don't fix this? Helen didn't hesitate. $48,000 per day once the window expires. Plus, we lose all access to vendor compliance systems until the breach is resolved. The room went silent. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. Can't we just override it? Get our IT team to restore access? Colin, the IT director, shook his head. Not possible. The system uses hardware encrypted authentication tied to Grace's biometric profile. Even if we clone the entire setup, the system would reject any access attempt from an unauthorized location. So what are you telling me? Samuel's voice had lost its casual confidence. That we gave Dylan an office, and now we owe Grace Dawson $48,000 a day? Not yet, Helen clarified. We have 6 more business days to resolve the breach. After that, yes. $48,000 per day, retroactive to the breach date. Jeremy told me that Samuel's face went through several colors during that explanation, settling somewhere between furious and terrified. The meeting ended with one directive. Fix this immediately. The first official outreach came at 2:14 p.m. that same day. An email from Helen, formal and carefully worded. Subject: regarding Sentinel Oversight Agreement. Dear Grace, we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss the recent office reassignment and explore options for maintaining operational continuity. Please let us know your availability this week. Best regards, Helen. I responded within an hour. Happy to discuss. My attorney will be joining. Please coordinate through her office. I forwarded Helen's email to my lawyer, a sharp woman named Andrea Lopez who specialized in vendor contract disputes. She'd helped me draft the Sentinel Agreement 5 years ago, and she'd warned me back then that I should maintain strict documentation. Companies like this, she'd said, they'll treat you like family until they don't. Make sure everything is in writing. She'd been right. Andrea responded to Helen the next morning with a proposed meeting time and a preliminary agenda that included breach remediation options, penalty assessment, and long-term operational framework. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. in their main conference room, the one with the glass walls that overlooked the entire office floor. I showed up 15 minutes early wearing my best suit, the charcoal one I saved for board presentations. Andrea met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the legal professional who was about to ruin someone's quarter. We were escorted to the conference room where Samuel, Helen, Robert, and Colin were already waiting. Dylan wasn't there. Probably for the best. Samuel stood when we entered, extending his hand. Grace, thank you for coming in. I think there's been a misunderstanding we can clear up quickly. I shook his hand but didn't smile. I'm here to listen. We sat. Andrea placed a leather folder on the table, opened it to reveal a neatly tabbed copy of the Sentinel Agreement, and folded her hands. Helen started. "Grace, we want to acknowledge that the office reassignment was handled poorly. That's on us. We should have communicated better. You should have followed the contract," Andrea interjected smoothly. "Section 8.4 is explicit about terminal relocation procedures." "We understand that now," Robert said, leaning forward. "And we're prepared to make this right. We can move Dylan to a different office, restore Grace's access, and continue as we were." I glanced at Andrea. She gave me a slight nod. "That's not sufficient," I said. Samuel's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" "The breach already occurred," Andrea explained. "Moving Dylan out of the office doesn't retroactively undo the violation. According to Section 12.2, once a material breach occurs, the vendor, in this case Sentinel Oversight, has the right to suspend services and assess penalties until a formal remediation agreement is executed." "We're offering a remediation," Helen protested. "Grace gets her office back, full access restored." "After 6 days of unauthorized use," I said quietly. 6 days where my systems were inaccessible, where audit reports failed, where vendor relationships were jeopardized because nobody bothered to check whether that office was just a room or something more. Samuel's expression darkened. "Grace, you're being unreasonable. This is a simple mistake." "Simple mistakes don't cost companies their compliance infrastructure," Andrea countered. "And they don't expose firms to regulatory violations. You currently have 4 overdue vendor attestations, 2 incomplete SOC2 reports, and a pending audit review that could result in substantial fines if not completed. All of that is a direct result of the breach." Robert rubbed his temples. "What do you want, Grace?" I took a breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since I watched Dylan spin in my chair like he owned the place. "I want Sentinel Oversight Solutions reclassified as an external critical vendor, not an internal resource. I want a revised agreement with updated penalty clauses, breach protections, and a mandate that the primary terminal location is non-negotiable. And I want a formal acknowledgement from this board that my role is essential infrastructure, not administrative overhead." Samuel stared at me. "You want us to treat you like an outside contractor?" "I am an outside contractor," I corrected. "I have been for 5 years. You just forgot that because it was convenient." The room fell silent. Helen and Robert exchanged glances. Colin looked uncomfortable. Finally, Samuel leaned back in his chair. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" Andrea answered before I could. "Then the breach window expires in 4 business days, penalties begin accruing at $48,000 per day, and Sentinel Oversight Solutions suspends all services until a court-mandated resolution is reached. Given the current backlog of compliance work, I'd estimate you're looking at 90 days minimum before you could even begin to rebuild what Grace has created. That's roughly $4 million in penalties, plus whatever regulatory fines you incur during that period." Samuel's face went pale. "Or," Andrea continued, "you agree to Grace's terms, we execute a new agreement, and services resume immediately with no penalties assessed for the breach period. Your choice." They agreed. It took 3 days to draft the new contract. Andrea made sure every clause was airtight, every contingency covered. The agreement reclassified Sentinel Oversight Solutions as a Tier 1 critical vendor, equal in importance to our cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity providers. The new terms included non-negotiable terminal location with a 6-month notice requirement for any proposed changes, mandatory quarterly reviews with board-level oversight, triple the previous retainer fee, breach penalties increased to $75,000 per day, a formal acknowledgement in the company handbook that Sentinel Oversight infrastructure was mission-critical. Samuel signed it without a word. His hand shook slightly as he scrawled his signature across the bottom of page 32. Dylan was quietly reassigned to a different office, an interior room with no windows and a door that didn't quite close all the way. I heard through Jeremy that he complained about it being claustrophobic and bad for his creativity. Nobody cared. My old office was restored exactly as I'd left it. The nameplate was polished. The desk was cleared of Dylan's energy drinks and designer notebooks. The monitors were reconnected to the Sentinel terminal, which hummed back to life the moment I entered my biometric credentials. Within 24 hours, Every delayed audit report completed. Vendor attestations pulled automatically. The SOC2 export fired on schedule. It was like the entire system had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. But I didn't stay. I worked from that office for exactly 1 week, just long enough to stabilize everything and make sure the transitions were clean. Then I sent an email to Samuel, Helen, and the board. Subject: Operational update. Effective immediately, I will be resuming remote operations for Sentinel Oversight Solutions. The primary terminal will remain in its designated location, and all access protocols will continue as specified in our agreement. I will be available for quarterly in-person reviews as contracted. Best regards, Grace Dawson, Principal, Sentinel Oversight Solutions. I didn't ask for permission. I informed them. And because the new contract didn't specify where I personally had to be, only where the terminal had to be, there was nothing they could say. That was 8 months ago. Now, every Tuesday at 3 a.m. my home monitoring system pings me with a notification. Sentinel Terminal, handshake successful. Audit stream active. It's automated, seamless, and completely invisible to everyone at Luxel Dynamics. They see the reports generate, the compliance dashboards update, the vendor relationships maintain themselves. What they don't see is me, sitting in my home office in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, watching the system I built continue to function flawlessly from 30 miles away. Samuel stepped down from daily operations 6 months ago. The board called it a strategic transition, but Jeremy told me the real reason. The investors lost confidence after the Sentinel fiasco became public knowledge. Apparently, nearly collapsing your compliance infrastructure because you wanted to give your son a better office doesn't inspire shareholder confidence. Dylan left the company entirely. Last I heard, he's working at a startup in Austin, doing something involving cryptocurrency and disrupting an industry he doesn't understand. His LinkedIn profile describes him as a strategic growth visionary. Sure. The new CEO, a woman named Natalie Frost, reached out to me personally during her first week. She invited me to lunch, nothing formal, just a conversation. I accepted. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. She was direct, competent, and refreshingly honest. I read the whole Sentinel file, she said over coffee. Every email, every contract revision, every board meeting transcript. And I need you to know that what happened to you was inexcusable. I nodded, surprised by her candor. I'm not asking you to come back full-time, she continued. I understand why you wouldn't want to, but I want to make sure you know that your work is valued. Not just tolerated or taken for granted. Valued. It was the first time anyone from Luxel Dynamics had said that to me in 9 years. Thank you, I said quietly. The contract Andrea negotiated, the one with the quarterly reviews and the board oversight, I'm going to honor every word of it. And I'm going to make sure everyone in that building understands that infrastructure isn't invisible. It's the foundation everything else stands on. We finished lunch talking about compliance trends, upcoming regulatory changes, and the challenges of maintaining vendor relationships in an increasingly complex business environment. Felt like talking to a peer, not a supervisor. When we parted ways, she shook my hand firmly. If you ever decide you want a different arrangement, my door is open. But until then, I'll make sure nobody touches that office again. She kept her word. The office, my old office, still sits exactly as I left it. The door stays locked unless I'm physically present. Facilities isn't allowed to clean it without written authorization. Even the IT team needs my approval to enter for routine maintenance. It's become something of an office legend. New employees ask about it during orientation. What's with the locked office on the executive floor? The answer varies depending on who you ask. Some say it's a security requirement. Others call it a critical infrastructure room. A few of the longtime staff know the real story and just smile knowingly. Jeremy told me that someone from HR once suggested converting it into a meditation room. Natalie shut that down immediately. That office, she'd said firmly, represents the most expensive lesson this company has ever learned. It stays exactly as it is. I visit 4 times a year for the mandatory quarterly reviews. I drive in early before most of the staff arrives, unlock the door, run system diagnostics, update security protocols, and generate compliance reports. The whole process takes about 3 hours. Then I lock the door behind me and drive home. Every time I leave, I pass the bullpen where they tried to relocate me. The cramped cubicles, the fluorescent lights, the constant hum of mediocre middle management. I see people hunched over keyboards, stressed and undervalued, and I remember what it felt like to be invisible. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm the Tuesday 3 a.m. ping that keeps Luxel Dynamics compliant. I'm the encrypted handshake that validates their entire vendor infrastructure. I'm the system they can't see, can't touch, and definitely can't replace. Samuel tried to give my office to his son because he thought I was disposable. He learned the hard way that some people aren't employees to be reassigned. Some people are the architecture that holds everything together. And when you try to remove the foundation, the whole building collapses. I didn't need revenge. I just needed them to understand what I was worth. And now, every time that terminal hums to life in an empty office 30 miles from where I'm sitting, they remember. They thought they were giving Dylan a room with a view. What they actually did was hand their entire compliance infrastructure to someone who finally understood her value. The quarterly retainer deposits into my business account like clockwork. The penalties they would have owed, those $4 million, sit there in the contract as a reminder of what almost happened. And Dylan? Dylan is somewhere in Austin, probably sitting in a WeWork, posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn about hustling and grinding. He still has no idea what any of those compliance binders actually meant. Last month I hired an assistant. Her name is Priya, and she's brilliant, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in cybersecurity compliance. I'm teaching her everything I know about vendor management, encryption protocols, and how to build systems that can't be dismantled by executive whims. "Why do you work from home?" she asked during her first week. I thought about it for a moment, then pulled up the Sentinel terminal feed on my monitor. The empty office, the locked door, the equipment humming quietly in the dark. "Because I can," I said simply. "And because I built something they need more than I need them." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's the goal," I continued. "Not to be indispensable out of desperation, but to be essential by design. Build systems they can't function without. Document everything. Protect your work. And never, ever assume they'll value you just because you're good at your job." Priya took notes. Last week she asked if she could sit in on the next quarterly review. I said yes. I want her to see that office, to understand what it represents. Not just a room with a view, but a monument to the cost of underestimating someone. We're scheduled to go in next Tuesday. I'll unlock the door, run the diagnostics, generate the reports. And Priya will see the nameplate that still sits on the desk. Grace Dawson, Principal, Sentinel Oversight Solutions. Not team player. Not infrastructure lady. Not someone who gets reassigned because the CEO's son wanted better lighting. Just my name, my title, and the quiet hum of a system that runs because I allow it to. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what would have happened if I'd fought back differently. If I'd stormed into Samuel's office that first day, demanded my space back, threatened legal action immediately. But then I remember Dylan spinning in my chair, feet on my desk, completely oblivious to what he was touching. I remember Samuel's dismissive wave, the "she won't mind," that reduced 9 years of expertise to background noise. And I realized that screaming wouldn't have taught them anything. Silence did. The quiet click of a system going offline. The blank dashboards. The failed audit reports. The mounting realization that the person they'd dismissed was the only thing standing between them and regulatory catastrophe. That taught them. Now when Natalie sends her quarterly check-in emails, they're respectful. Professional. She asks questions instead of issuing directives. She acknowledges expertise instead of assuming compliance. "Grace wanted to get your input on our new vendor onboarding protocol," her last email read. "I know you're busy, but if you have time this week, I'd value your perspective." I read it twice, still surprised by the contrast to how Samuel used to communicate. He would have just implemented the new protocol and told me to make it work. Natalie asks. Samuel demanded. That's the difference between a leader and someone who just inherited a title. The Sentinel terminal is scheduled for a security upgrade next quarter. It's a routine maintenance procedure, updating encryption standards and refreshing authentication protocols. Normally it would take about 6 hours of downtime. I sent Natalie a detailed proposal outlining the upgrade schedule, the potential risks, and the mitigation strategies. She responded within 2 hours. Approved. Let me know what you need from our end to make this as smooth as possible. And Grace, thank you for the thorough documentation. It's appreciated. It's appreciated. 3 words that would have changed everything 9 years ago. But 9 years ago I was trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I was invisible. Now I don't prove anything. I just show up, do the work, and let the results speak. And every Tuesday at 3 a.m., when that terminal handshake completes successfully, when the audit stream lights up green, when the compliance dashboards refresh with perfect accuracy, that's me speaking. Not with words or presentations or carefully crafted emails begging for recognition. Just with the quiet, steady pulse of a system that works because I built it right. Dylan sent me a LinkedIn connection request last month. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes, trying to decide if I was curious enough to see what he'd written in his message. I accepted. His message was exactly what I expected. Hey Grace. Hope you're doing well. Would love to catch up sometime and hear about what you're working on. Always respected your expertise. Always respected your expertise. The man who'd literally taken my office without a second thought now claimed he'd always respected me. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve your energy, not even the minimal effort of a polite decline. They deserve exactly what Dylan got from me the day he moved into my office. Nothing. No explanation, no confrontation, no emotional labor spent trying to make him understand what he'd done. Just silence and the natural consequences of his actions. He's still there on my connection list, occasionally liking posts about leadership and innovation, completely unaware that he's connected to the person whose career disruption nearly bankrupted his father's company. Maybe one day I'll tell him. Probably not. Priya asked me yesterday what I would say if I ever ran into Samuel Knight somewhere public. A coffee shop, an industry conference, somewhere where pretending not to see each other wasn't an option. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ask him if Dylan's new office has good feng shui. She laughed. Would you really? I thought about it. No. I'd probably just nod politely and keep walking. Because the thing about winning quietly is that you don't need to gloat. The victory is in the work continuing, the system running, the quarterly payments clearing. That's enough. Is it though? Priya pressed. Don't you want him to know how badly he messed up? He knows, I said simply. Every time Natalie sends him the compliance reports, every time the board reviews vendor relationships, every time someone mentions Sentinel Oversight Solutions in a meeting, he knows. That's better than anything I could say to his face. She nodded slowly. You're more patient than I am. Not patient, I corrected. Just aware that some people only learn through consequences, not conversations. Samuel Knight could apologize 1,000 times and it wouldn't change what happened. But the new contract, the reclassification, the acknowledgement that my work is critical infrastructure, that changed everything. The office stays locked. The system runs flawlessly. The quarterly reviews happen on schedule. And every Tuesday at 3 a.m. I get a notification that most people would find mundane. Sentinel terminal, handshake successful. Audit stream active. 18 words that mean everything is working exactly as it should. 18 words that represent stability, compliance, and the infrastructure that keeps Luxel Dynamics operational. 18 words that used to come from an office they tried to give away like a party favor. I don't work from that office anymore. I don't need to. The terminal runs whether I'm there or not, secured behind multiple layers of encryption and access protocols that only I control. But it stays there in that locked room as a permanent reminder. Not a shrine to revenge or bitterness. A monument to the simple truth that some people are infrastructure, not interchangeable parts. And when you forget that, when you treat essential systems like decorative elements, you learn expensive lessons. $48,000 per day expensive. $4 million over 90 days expensive. Career-ending, board restructuring, CEO resigning expensive. All because someone wanted a room with better light. Next Tuesday I'll drive to Luxel Dynamics with Priya. We'll arrive early before the morning rush. I'll unlock that office door and she'll see it for the first time. The monitors, the terminal, the compliance certifications still hanging on the walls. And the nameplate on the desk. Grace Dawson, Principal, Sentinel Oversight Solutions. Not invisible. Not disposable. Not someone who gets moved aside because it's convenient. They tried to give my office to someone who didn't earn it, didn't understand it, and didn't deserve it. Instead, they gave me something far more valuable. Proof of my own worth, documented in a contract they can't ignore, enforced by penalties they can't afford, And validated every Tuesday at 3 a.m. when that terminal confirms I'm still here. Not in the building. In the system. Exactly where I need to be.